question had to do with the DOE requirements. On June 18th, when we were here at a board meeting, Dr. Littlefield explained that the tuition contract had to be approved by the DOE before being voted on. And that timeline would have made us have to have a contract by mid-October. And that was the premise that we were operating under as far as what our timeline was. On December 17th, the Hooksett School Board passed the tuition contract without the approval of the DOE. And as we were getting into December, I believed that it couldn't happen because of the presentation that I had got from Dr. Littlefield, saying that it had to go up to DOE, they had to look at it, they have to send it back. So I'm left with a question of why did we approve that contract without the approval of the DOE as we were told it had to be?
It was my understanding that it could be approved by the DOE before, but it did not have to be. That was my interpretation of what happened when Dr. Littlefield.
Well, this is a question for Dr. Littlefield, and I reviewed the video, and Dr. Littlefield doesn't say at the time that it could be or couldn't be. He was very clearly, he was up at the board setting up a timeline for us, and that mid-October date is what was the final time.
Well, one of the things you have to be careful of is context. I believe what happened, if memory serves me correct. I requested that the board hold a retreat in May. Because I suggested to the board that there were a number of questions that you needed to address to properly deal with the Manchester situation. Remember now, we hadn't been to court, none of that had happened. And I really support some of this stuff going into the record, so just give me a second. I asked the board at the retreat to address 7 questions among themselves and give direction to the administration. This was a workshop scheduled for Tuesday, May 21st. And here's what I said. Number 1, if our assertion of breach is successful. Now remember, so what you're really referring to is conversation that took place before breach. We need to have a place for our high school students to go after June 2014 if we're successful in the breach. 2, if our assertion of breach is not successful, do we plan to notify Manchester on June 30th, 2016, our intention to withdraw in 2018? Or do we plan to notify Manchester in June of 2016 and negotiate an early exit date? Number 3, what is the process that we are going to develop to decide as a community whether we seek a single contract or a multi-district contract? What is our timeline? And again, this is May 21st I'm asking these questions. Number 4, depending on the answers to 1, 2, and 3, how are we going to decide who we approach at meeting public school districts? Number 5, how are we going to develop a community awareness plan when 1 and 2 are determined? Number 6, what are the financial impacts of each of our choices? Number 7, other factors to consider in relation to our high school situation. And then at the bottom I put, note, we need to accomplish this in just 7 short months. We need a plan and a process. That was May 21st. At that May 21st meeting, there were 4 members seated on the school board. On that May 21st meeting, One member came in, indicated to the chair if she didn't apologize for the way the previous meeting had been adjourned, he was not going to stay. She did not apologize, the member left. A second member came in and said, my friend is leaving, so am I, and left. That left a board of 2 people, lack of a quorum. Those questions were never addressed as they should have been addressed. And that meeting was never rescheduled. On June, that's May 21st, the board took no action. At your board meeting, and it may have been June 18th, I gave you some charts. If this, then that, then this, then that. They were flow charts. And I gave you a possible timeline. And that timeline was based on the action that the board took to pursue a single district contract. And so I gave you a time for doing that. In June, if you were going to do a single district contract, if we prevailed in July, or we settled in July, there was no reason why a contract could not have been negotiated over the summer, finalized in September. That's what the timeline that I gave you said. And submitted to the Department of Education in October so that it would be approved prior to the March 11th vote. I don't believe I ever said it was required before. You can submit a contract for DOE approval before. You can provide it after the vote. If I had my druthers, I would want to know that when I went into a March election that it had been approved. Very common practice to submit them after the vote. So my answer to the question is, there was a lot that led up to that, a lot of unanswered questions. I forced the issue at a board meeting because I thought it was the right thing to do for this community. Because none of the 7 questions that needed to be addressed and planned for prior to charting the course for our high school kids, none of that had been addressed. So I forced it at that June meeting, gave you some scenarios, gave you a possible timeline. Never said that it's a requirement that it be approved first.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield. I'll provide the video when you circle the date and you said we have to have it by then. I don't believe you said it's required, but you said we have to have it by that period. So I'll provide that to you.
And you don't have to provide me with videos. I have enough videos to watch. I am going to caution everybody that when you pull things out of context, out of a lengthy discussion, we can make anything say what we wanted to say. I do know, I've done this before, and done it very, very smoothly. And I do know what has to be done to submit this to the committee. Before or after, it doesn't matter. The point of the matter is, this community deserved to have that contract completed and submitted when I suggested in the timeline that it could be submitted. It would have ended a lot of heartache, or would have prevented a lot of heartache.
Well, that all was not part of my question, Dr. Littlefield. I was left with the impression that that was a hard date, and I believe the rest of the board was.
I can't speak for the rest of the board, Mr. Pearl, but you were incorrect in your assumption.
Well, I will provide you the video, and you can watch for yourself as you instruct us that that is the date. My next question.
But any tuition agreement or agreements that we make need to be approved by the State Board of Education. So I did look up their meeting schedule. Watch me start to follow up this. And they have a meeting on December 19th. The tuition agreement needs to be submitted to the commissioner for her approval about a month before that. Now, remember I told you last meeting, I've done this before, I can do it again. Something I forgot to tell you, the first time I did it and submitted the tuition agreement to the commissioner, she did not approve it. She wanted some changes made in it. And I think that we have to anticipate that the Department of Education and the commissioner, their approval of a tuition agreement is not a pro forma approval. They actually read these agreements, comment on the agreements, and ask questions about the agreements. So to be really, really safe, we would want to get our tuition agreement or agreements to the state board for their November 21st meeting, just in case there are any issues with it, which means we'd want to get the tuition agreements to the commissioner by mid-October. So the challenge that's facing the board in terms of the policy decisions you're going to make in between June 18th, 2013, I think we have to have tuition agreements, regardless of where you go, signed, sealed, delivered, and at 101 Pleasant Street, Concord, by October 15th.